Hello everyone, welcome. I'm on today with famous YouTuber Aron Ra, and we're going to talk about quite a range of topics today, starting with your recent set of speeches that you gave. You did a tour recently, wasn't it?
I did a book tour a few months ago. I'm not sure which tour to talk about, unless because I do a lot of travel, so there's a lot of things you could be talking about.
I saw on YouTube you put up a video where you gave a talk about mysticism a little while back.
Okay, yeah, it's hard to say what tour that was. I do a lot.
Yeah, you do. You give a lot of speeches, and they're very interesting to watch. I enjoyed your mythicism speech, talking about how our modern conception of Jesus might be based on multiple people who wouldn't recognize themselves as Jesus. Thought that was very intriguing.
Oh, thank you. I just did a debate last night with a Christian that was arguing for the Bible as being a historical document, and I'm like, how the hell is it a historical document? And so he's thinking that if you can find some piece of the Bible that, under one interpretation, could mean that let's say the wrong number of the wrong group of people crossed the wrong waterway at the wrong time, but without any miracles and without any Moses, then that somehow supports the justification of the Bible as a historical document. I'm inclined to say no, it does not.
Understandably.
Yeah. I mean, and we're gonna be having that conversation again this evening, and it's strange that he and I did not disagree on any of the facts of the matter. We just disagreed on the interpretation of those facts. How he took all of that to support the Bible as authentic. These are the very facts that imply that the Bible is bogus, that is a man-made compilation and an amalgamation of different legends, some of which are partially true and some of which are made up out of whole cloth, and all of them are pieced together from different stories that weren't ever originally related. So how does he make the assumption that he does, that there's actually a God and that it's actually and that God is Jesus? No, and we're going to get more into how he made all of these other unsupported assertions later this evening. I think we're going to do it again. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's really cool. That's really neat. So what originally, in case my viewers don't know, what got you into YouTube?
About 20 years ago, close to Y2K, just before Y2K, I remember I was in an internet tech support job where I had unrestricted browsing and unmonitored access. So, and on a job that required very little of me, I'm just basically doing the same call again and again and again, telling people to reboot their computer. So on screen, obviously there's no demand, of my talents, while doing the job. So I just did an awful lot of reading and found myself on Usenet arguing with scientists and with theologians. And I seem to have tapped into the best of both sides. What had clued me that there was a problem there was that some of these religious people were bragging about how they had positioned certain senators and judges and so forth, that their churches had voted as a block according to whatever the minister tells everybody to vote, and they all vote the way he says, and they're all doing it as a coordinated effort between all these different churches so that they could have this culture war that they imagined having. And the original goal was to replace everybody in the U.S. government at the grassroots level with evangelical fundamentalists. And the original goal was that they would ultimately vote away the law, or the wall of separation between church and state, such
Nice.
that we have a theocracy that was, according to the people that came, and actually did elect senators and so forth from the Chalcedon Institute, whose goal was to have a government that enforced Levitical law. So wow. Exactly what Sharia is, but the Christian version of that. That's what they wanted. and
Wow.
that's what got me into the opposition, to everything they were trying to do. And that wedge strategy was supposed to have culminated in Kitzmiller versus Dover, where they, of course, had a positioned right wing Republican conservative Christian judge, but he wasn't quite insane enough to vote the way they wanted him to, and so that's why that ruling went that way, because it was actually a good judge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so things have just escalated from there. I mean, I ended up giving testimony to the Board of Education a number of times. I've testified at the House, subcommittees, and now I'm actually stepping into politics myself, because
Mm.
what I see is it's always right-wing Christian evangelicals, and they're not doing anything for people. They're kind of undermining everything that this country that made this country great. And if I can just rail on that for a moment, I mean, everything that made America great, and Donald Trump obviously doesn't realize this because he's doing the very opposite to make it great again, was that we had a secular government wherein immigrants could come from other countries, and they would be escaping the religious persecution in other countries that wouldn't exist here, because the government is a secular state, and therefore if the government doesn't have a religion, then all religions are on an equal playing field, and you can't either promote or suppress either one from the state level. So that meant that everybody had an equal shot at success. That was the American dream. It was the one place where they could guarantee that would happen. Well, now a lot of other countries are doing that. They're doing just as well as we were, and we aren't doing that well anymore. So now it's become the tortoise and the hare, where we are lying on our laurels, sleeping and bragging that we are the best damn country in this world, and we're being passed by every tortoise on the road right now. Yeah, so that's my perspective on that.
Yeah. I saw your talk with the Texas Board of Education. That was very alarming just to watch, except for the first guy. They let the first guy who was pro science go. They gave him some time, but then after that, it was all the time they could spare for every ID proponent. And then you came up there and you said, "Oh, hey, I've got source after source after source after source." Yeah, you and Lalandra. And they were like, "Okay, that's nice. Move along." And I just thought, what the heck just happened?
Yeah, they do not want to talk to me ever.
They're scared. They're shaking in their boots.
Yeah, one of the fundamentalists on the board tried to give an interrogation to trip me up the last time I testified, and it blew up badly in his face. So they won't even talk to me anymore. And they tried to do that with my wife too. They tried to bully her. There was one guy on the board that was bully every woman that got up to testify. He would grill. He wouldn't say anything to the men, but any woman that got up to testify, he would go after them and try to trip them up, try to intimidate them. And that blew up on him also, because my wife went off on him. And so, yeah, they don't seem to realize that bias is an issue of credibility. That if your history book is biased, then it's questionable.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. Yeah, and some books are slightly more biased than others, like the one teaching that Moses was a founding father. Slight bias, very slight.
Yeah, and I've seen bias from either direction. I don't like it either way. That's the reason I didn't like.
Mhm.
I took a class in what was it, sociology, and it was too far in the hippie left for me too. I mean, any degree to the right and it's bad, and too far to the left and it's I don't put up with it either. But if it's not, that just identifies that the bias can go either way.
Right. Yeah, that happens. I
By the
think
way,
there's
headphones. Do I need to be wearing headphones or anything like that?
It's up to you. If you want to, that's fine. If not, that's also fine.
Now,
Then
this can obviously wait. Okay.
What was it? Oh yeah. I remember reading in Foundational Falsehoods, because I got the book, great book. That your son was who was he talking to about Hesperocyon? You went to some kind of
yeah. I'm trying to remember what that guy's name was. He was called the bulldog for the Institute for Creation Research, and I can't remember his name now.
Okay.
But yeah,
It wasn't Behe, was it?
Huh?
It wasn't Behe or Casey Luskin? Or...
No, it wasn't. It was lower grade than that.
Oh.
The funny thing was that my son at that time didn't understand why I do what I do. That was his first encounter with those people. And it was interesting watching it because Frank Sherwin.
Frank Sherwin, okay.
That was his name. And every time he spoke, my son would look around and he'd see the audience. He'd see like little old ladies nodding their heads, obeisance, agreeing with whatever Frank Sherwin said. Mm-hmm. And my son knew that everything he said is wrong. And it's not forgivably wrong. Everything Sherwin said was a lie. And he was bilking all these little old ladies. And my son was so angry. He was 14 years old at that time. And he was so angry, he was visibly vibrating with rage at the fact that this guy was duping these little old ladies who he saw as susceptible. They didn't have any way to know they were being lied to. So at the end of the conference, and when we had an opportunity to stand up and speak to the speakers, I stood up to go talk to him, of course, and I couldn't make it 2 steps. I was immediately surrounded by all the Christians in the room, saying the stupidest things that you can imagine. Like if we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? That level of dumb, right? Like these people had never encountered an atheist before, and so they're going to give me their level 1 grade apologetics of novice.
Gotcha.
So I'm mired in that little mess. But my 14-year-old son just rifled through the whole crowd. He was a little bitty thing at that time, and I saw, like over my shoulder, I saw where Frank Sherwin is this towering guy, and he's leaning over like this, and my son is pointing his finger at his face, and my little bitty 14-year-old son was scolding the hell out of Frank Sherwin, and there was a gathering crowd. So while I'm busy with all these people and I can't get away, I keep looking over, and there's more and more people surrounding my son and Sherwin, until finally Sherwin fled the building. And I mean literally fled, because he just had his ass handed to him by a 14-year-old in front of this huge crowd. And so what had happened, I found out later, other people were coming up to pat me on the back over this. They said that Sherwin was asking my son questions that my son was not expected to know, that nobody's expected to be able to answer. But he did have an answer, a rapid-fire, immediate answer, and these were answers that Sherwin had no defense against. Well, give me a transitional species then. Hesperocyon! What the hell is that? I don't know I don't have the pre-rehearsed, patented apologetics to rationalize or justify or dismiss systematically every excuse for Hesperocyon. I don't know what that is. Right? And he says, well, give me a positive mutation then. So ignore the evidence that you just got to give you something else, right? Keep shifting until you come up with something they can't give you. And he said, well, give me a positive mutation then. And he said, the CCR5 Delta 32 mutation, surely that's beneficial, right? And of course, the guy's got no idea again. Who rattles that off?
Right?
But it wasn't the CCR5, was it? It was the...
was it LRP5?
LRP5, yes. So yeah, and that was brilliant. And I never saw Frank Sherwood again, by the way.
Fled the country.
Yeah, it's funny that I go to all these events that I can, and I never saw him a second time.
Yeah.
So yeah, my son ended his career. So much for your bulldog.
another feather in his cap.
Yeah, that would be funny if they were to reenact that, because I mean that was when it was a 14-year-old kid. That tiny little 14-year-old kid is now a kung fu instructor, physical trainer, security guard, bodyguard, and bounty hunter.
Wow.
Slightly harder to intimidate now than he was then.
I would imagine so. Yeah. Yeah, that's really funny. I really enjoyed the anecdotes in the Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. It was just a really good book, and I remember you pointed out that you hadn't heard anything from any of the creationist organizations about rebuttals to your book. As far as I'm aware, that's still true. I tried looking up one a little while back, and the closest thing I could find to a rebuttal was on like the 3rd page of Google, but it wasn't from a creationist. It was from an atheist who had some quibbles about a few dates that were mentioned in like ancient history,
Mhm.
and so, but I mean that was it. They just like haven't. They just looked at it and said, "Nope."
Yep. Yeah, these are required beliefs. So as Ken Ham put it, so if you want to believe in salvation, which is the second half of the Bible, then you have to believe in creation, which is the first half of the Bible. So you literally have to make believe
Mm.
somehow. And then the way to do that is his way he put it was put on your God glasses, which is another way of describing confirmation bias, to
Mm.
simply throw out all the evidence. He's described evidence that he has seen, and which is he has summarily rejected. He simply pretends that it doesn't exist or that it doesn't matter because he's going to believe the book of fables over demonstrable truth. And so that's where he's at.
Yeah, I especially enjoyed the chapter creation science. I like the way that one was done because you gave. It's like it wasn't here's point by point by point why creation science is wrong. You gave a biography of Richard Owens, and in giving that biography, you showed why creation science can't work. I thought that was masterfully done. I thought that was very well done because it was just absurd, and I love talking about the um the whole Pungidae uh clade that he invented to shoo away all the other apes. I love telling that to creationists because they, as Savannah and I, a geology convention recently, and there was actually a creationist there. Believe it or not, I have this board that says like dinosaurs and dragons in the Bible, and so I got into it with her, and she gave us this paper that said, "Oh, a list of creation scientists," which not even all of them believed in creationism, nor were most of them, if any, creation scientists. And so
And what
Linnaeus
they're
was one of
really
those.
talking about is are scientists who lived before Darwin
Yeah,
and so wouldn't have been relevant anyway.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so one of those was Linnaeus, and I really wish that was one of the things I had touched on, but there was. She's like, there's no fossil evidence, or what did I say? I said there was a. So when you believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, you ignore geography or biogeography, genetics, embryology, the fossil record. And she's like, of course, the one thing she went after was, I don't think the fossil record shows evolution. Which then I told her about the whole ape, the hominin lineage, and then the beautiful foraminifera lineage.
Yeah,
Of course, she just looked upset. But
anybody that doesn't think the fossil record shows evolution would do well to peruse the Phylogeny Explorer project once it's finally online.
yeah, that's actually something I want to ask about too. Is there a date for when that's expected to drop?
There's not. Right now, it's a matter of hosting. We understand that when we go live, that there's going to be significant traffic, at least, even if it's not initially, there
Hmm.
will be as it builds. So over the course of let's say it goes live in January, just to pick an arbitrary date. A year after that, the traffic is going to be much heavier than it was initially. And what's going to happen is what we want. We're trying to pull up funding both for the Phylogeny Explorer project and also for Paleos.com. Paleos.com, all of those creators are now like kind of signed on alliance with us. They want to integrate,
Yeah.
and their site was used by professional paleontologists around the world. And the issue was that they had so much traffic to it that they couldn't master the funds to keep it online. When you have a website that gets a lot of traffic, it's not like a lot of people think about, when you put your website online, you might pay $10, $20 for that domain name. It's your personal homepage, and
Mhm.
12 people might go to it. But if hundreds of people a day are going to that site for various reasons, then it's going to require more server space and more dedication, and there's going to be more money involved. And so what I was told was, whereas I'm expecting, well, this isn't going to cost anything. This is what, my PHP is $20 a year. However, I've been told that it could be in the tens of thousands if it's very
Mm.
successful. That a very successful web page will be in the tens of thousands of dollars a year. And we are building something that is going to be pretty big as far as data too. So I mean, if you talk about, we're only got like we have tens of thousands of species integrated right now and a few hundred clades, and we don't yet have any of the encyclopedic information. We are starting the second phase now, where I want people to start putting in the illustrations and the charts and the full explanations, so that when you click on any clade, you'll get what the Arizona Tree of Life project used to have. Every one of the clades had, this a large article with a bunch of associated graphs and charts and other information. So it's an encyclopedia of phylogeny that we're trying to produce, so that it would be a learning tool. So that gets a lot more voluminous in server space again, and then raises the amount of money that we need to keep it going, and especially now that we're integrated with Paleos. So we want it to be one hub for both sites, and so we're hoping that we can get a major university to sponsor it. But that's going to be a trick to do that. And I'm also petitioning other organizations like the Dawkins Foundation and others like that to see if anybody outside of the university sphere can host it. But I'd be just as happy having somebody like Cambridge, for example, host it.
Oh yeah, Paleos is great. It's a wonderful resource. I remember on your was it the tenth foundational falsehoods of creationism? You had this like little program as a little graphic where you just like open the folders and over again, and like so many people requested like, hey, we want that program.
And that's what this is. Literally, that is based on that. So I did what you're referring to is the 10th foundational falsehood of creationism, where I made an animation, and a lot of people thought that was a real program. And so the Phylogeny Explorer project is based on that animation, just so that those hundreds of requests could be satisfied. There are other cladograms that you can go to online that will show you end species, but they don't show you why the species are where they are, and so you don't understand what the phylogeny is really all about. Because even if this is a strange thing, while the Phylogeny Channel, or while the Phylogeny Explorer project has every fossil that anybody's aware of, all the paleontologists, putting in, so that you will be able to find things here you can't find anywhere else. And paleos.com did much the same thing, so that the average layman won't be blocked by a paywall like many of the scientific organizations are. You can see exactly where all the if you want to find transitionals, they're all there. Just click on it and take a look at it. But even if there were no fossil transitions, the systematic classification of life by itself alone is enough to support and effectively prove evolution, even without transitionals in the fossil record, just by the classification alone.
I'm really glad that it's going to integrate fossils, because I think that is one of the drawbacks of one zoom. One zoom is really cool, but it's pretty all living things.
Yeah,
it's just living things, which if you send like a creationist to it, they're just going to be like, oh, well, this is all just living things. Where are the transitions? Blah blah blah.
Exactly, and it's funny that Dawkins was working on that, because that's modern zoology as opposed to paleontology, and they had him as a reference on it. So it was a bit of a challenge asking him to become involved with my project, because it would seem that mine is contradicting one zoom, which it's not meant to, but one zoom is a very pretty kind of first look. But as I says, doesn't get into the mechanics in order to understand phylogeny, which my project actually does.
Yeah. We have a biologist in the chat. He's asking, how do you resolve polytomies?
What we've got is mostly autodidacts. We do have some paleo students that are working on this project, the people that are fleshing it out. Ultimately, the goal is to have it taken over by professional paleontologists. I was just contacted yesterday by a paleontologist who specializes in the evolution of whales, and so she's going to be looking at the program too. Most of the time, you start with something easy to access, like Wikipedia, and you go down to the source material that is cited at the bottom of Wikipedia, and then you compare the different sources. And when you find a discrepancy, and we found many, then you have to read the peer-reviewed material directly. And we often find that there's more recent and more comprehensive peer-reviewed material than is cited by Wikipedia. So in every discrepancy we found so far, we've been able to find a solution for it. I mean, like for one, placozoans. I'm trying to remember which organism they are. I realized that they had been misdiagnosed or misclassified.
Okay.
They were a basal life form, even to peripherans, even to sponges, right? Basal even to sponges. Yet they were put into eumetazoa, which didn't make any sense. These things don't belong there. Not when they don't even have all the criteria required to be an animal. They don't have an internal digestive tract, for example. So why are they classified there? Now, I can't just go by my opinion that that's not the case. I just recognized that that can't be the case. So I did more research on it. And in that case, I not only found a comprehensive study that compared the genome as well as the morphology, but I was also literally on the phone with a professor of developmental biology just to confirm that the way I reconfigured it is exactly correct. So I do have at least a couple professors of developmental biology, looking at this, and the more scientists I bring onto it, the happier I'll be about it, because I want this to be a peer-reviewed resource. There are going to be times when there's a discrepancy that can't be resolved so simply as that. I mean, let's take pterosaurs, for example. I was talking to Darren Naish, who is one of the
tetrapod zoology.
Very good, very good. And so you know who he is. He's obviously an authority, as it were, on pterosaurs. And he accepts that there's two different phylogenies in kind of dispute, and there's no way to resolve them because we don't have any genome from pterosaurs. We don't have any surviving descendants. There's no way that we could map the genes to get confirmation, because we're talking about a twin-nested hierarchy now. So everything with pterosaurs has to be done by physiology or morphology, and that's it. There generally is going to be one consensus item or one a dominant, let's say. It would be a dominant tree, and in which case, if there is an alternate tree, then when you click on that link, there will be an alternate tree that will be just as accessible from beyond that. When you click on it, you can, when you click on any of the nodes within that alternate tree, and there'll be an explanation of why that's the alternate tree. But when you click on one of those, it'll take you back to the main tree, back to where things get normal again.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's pretty intense.
Thank you. The big thing with this project was that it had to be able to account for all discrepancies and for corrections. And I made reference, I just gave a speech that I uploaded, I think, yesterday, where I was talking about Miko's phylogeny archive. And I was very impressed with this guy's work because it's one man who composed this in this phenomenal clade tree all by himself, and doing it the old-fashioned way, where everything is in Courier new font, and you press space, 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 plus, and then enter, and then space, 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 vertical line. You can make everything line up, right? So just imagine how meticulous that is, how long that had to have taken for the entire tree of life for everything, right? But unfortunately, and he admits this to his credit, he says that his work is only his own, and it is not peer-reviewed. And so consequently, there will be mistakes in there. Like I found Oreopithecus in two different trees.
Okay.
So obviously the same species can't have emerged twice. But I mean, I still have to applaud the guy for being the first to produce a full-on navigable tree of life it was so voluminous. I can't imagine the amount of work that it took that guy. Can you imagine the hours and hours over months? To do all that? It's amazing.
Yeah, that is very crazy. I think that would.
He can't make corrections. Because
he can't make corrections.
The way the tree is constructed, if you have to correct anything, let's say you have to correct a basal node, that means you've got to correct everything after that by hand. So that would be maddening, right?
Yeah.
So what we created something where it is possible now that if we discover that the genome implies that this node isn't actually in this grouping, but it's in this grouping, we can move that node and all of the daughters of that node will move with it.
Cool. That's good. That's very good. Yeah, I think that put the zoologist through a loop if the same species could arise twice.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it was just an oversight.
Mhm.
You know, and it would have been easy enough to just remove Oreopithecus from one line and leave it because it was an end node. It ended up extinct. There was nothing based on it, but there were others like the Arizona Tree of Life project was completed before they completed the human genome, and of course the human genome came first. But now we've got that all computerized, so that we now, instead of having to take all these different PhD professionals, take them a couple of years, concentrated effort to do one genome. It now takes a computer will do a different genome every day, just kind of automatically. But that means that there are sometimes things that have been identified by morphology, and sometimes maybe it wasn't in-depthly studied, like the division between anteaters and aardvarks, for example, where it turned out that anteaters, aardvarks, and pangolins are not as closely related as they were once imagined to be, based on some shared common trait because they didn't look deeply enough at it. Well, the genome verifies that, hey, you should have studied a little closer because you missed this. And then it showed that aardvarks are actually more closely related to elephants, and pangolins are actually more closely related to carnivores and creodonts. And we can leave anteaters where they are.
Yeah, it was it's funny we mentioned that because I was reading a paper just the other day on how all the thanks to RJ Downard, the Xenarthrans as well as the toothless cetaceans and tubula dentata, which is the aardvarks, and another
It's
group.
so delightful talking to a zoology student because you just these words.
Why, thank you. I'll try.
On Xenarthra, by the way, by Richard Dawkins.
Do what?
I was corrected on Xenarthra by Richard Dawkins himself.
Wow.
We saw the Phylogeny Challenge video, and later that day, I ran into him we were at a conference in Dublin, Ireland, and he like pulled me aside and he said he saw the video and he was very happy with it because it showed all this. I'm like, well, that's very kind of you, thank you. And I said, and I admitted to him that I had mispronounced something, or I think that I mispronounced something, and he goes, you misspelled it as well. Okay.
Yeah. So like all these toothless orders of mammals all have the genes for enamel, for making enamel. Of course, why the heck would they have genes for making teeth if they don't have teeth? It's it's just hilarious. And creationists like, what genes for making teeth? What are you talking about?
Yeah, there's a PAX9 gene that I think it's PAX9 that controls human wisdom teeth. And they're trying to find a way of inciting that mutation. Because if we can because human jaws, we have the same dentition that the other great apes do, but we don't have, our jaws are too graceful, too small to house all those teeth. So you end up with impacted wisdom teeth and so forth, leading to morbidity and other issues. And this has been a cause of death in a number of people. So what they want to do is that they wish that they could there was a way of inciting that mutation such that people who have this particular mutation in the PAX9 gene just never develop. It's called an anagenesis. They never develop the wisdom tooth. So they never have any of these problems, and they never have to see the dentist about it. So great.
Would have been nice for me.
Change that if we had, if you ever saw the movie Gattaca, it's like you can manipulate the genes to turn on or off, whatever. So we've just bypassed all of these other potential issues of cancer, heart disease, morbidity, impacted wisdom teeth. It would be nice to control all of that and just be able to produce perfect kids all the time.
Yeah. I have another question from this guy's the biologist. He says, how will the Phylogeny Explorer project depict things like endosymbiosis and allopolyploid speciation events?
Endosymbiosis is a fun one because uh, this is an area of horizontal gene transfer that had to be explained in multiple places because people want there to be some kind of a ancestor descendant lineage where such cannot exist, where you have in this case, for other people listening who don't know what they're talking about here, they're talking about how eukaryotes absorbed a rickettsia bacteria, which then became our entrapped mitochondria. And then plants on top of that later on, because they already had mitochondria, the plants then also absorbed cyanobacteria, which perform that have the chloroplasts that, of course, was what makes plants functional as plants. Is how they do the. Why am I losing words at the moment?
Photosynthesis.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So basically, all of your eukaryote cells encompass bacterial cells and are powered by bacterial cells that are now incorporated into the system. They have their own DNA. They reproduce along with your cells, but they're not a product of your cells. They are actually completely independent. Now, this doesn't work either from an evolutionary perspective or from a creationist perspective, certainly not. But it's because it's not actually evolution. Endosymbiosis is a very different process. And then you have other issues of horizontal gene transfer, which get really confusing in that microbes can trade genetic material literally on contact by a number of different means. And this means that classifying a phylogenetic tree for bacteria can be very difficult because there's going to be all kinds of things that just don't make sense. And even in the eukaryotes, to a lesser degree, you're going to have eukaryotes that have horizontal gene transfer so that their tree can be muddied by, let's say, for example, humans, 8% of our genome is endogenous retroviruses. These are viruses that our ancestors survived and left the genetic product of written into our genome, into the zygotes. So there's some portion of our genes that have nothing to do with our genealogy. Now, it's not enough to confuse our ancestry. Nobody's going to suspect that we evolved from a virus, for example. The nice thing about being multicellular is if there is a horizontal gene transfer by impact kind of thing, it will only affect that one cell. And even if it affects a cell that ends up being inherited, like a gamete cell, then you can still weed out which genes are part of which are the junk DNA and which is the actual, genetic or ancestral or phylogenetic DNA.
Well, and what about allopolyploid speciation events, or is anything done for those?
I don't have any consideration for the different types of speciation. When I thought that there was only 4. At some point, there's going to have to be explanations on that. One of the things that the website is going to have is a discussion board where anybody can get on, and it doesn't matter about your background or anything. Everybody can get on and have. You can argue if you want to, or you can discuss scientific matters, in an academic sphere. Such that if there are corrections that need to be made, they will be. And if there's things that need to be included or accounted for that currently aren't, then that would be included too. The types of speciation so far haven't been addressed. And the only one that was really of concern to me was the few instances where hybridization seems to have been a factor. Because while creationists commonly think that the way evolution works is that you breed 2 different species to get a third, right? That's obviously they've got it completely backwards, right? You start with one species, it becomes 2. But there's rare instances in which the genome implies that it actually was a hybridization of 2 things that produces this third example that ends up proliferating. But as I said, those are rare and don't have a significant impact on the rest of the tree. And I don't think that the type of speciation in any case otherwise is going to have an impact on the tree itself. But if this person wants to write out their contention and email it to me or be on with part of the project, because I created a Facebook group for the Phylogeny Explorer development. And before we have the webpage that has the discussion board, at least we have the Facebook page. So any contentions that you want to take up with the people that are actually putting the data in, you're welcome to do that.
Let's see. I hope he heard that there's a sunflower called a Helianthus anomalus that was a hybrid of Helianthus anus and another one. I don't remember what the other one was. And then there are some cichlids that are hybrids, like the flower horn that are out there.
Cichlids,
which
we're
are
talking about fish?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's some very people breed like the most aggressive cichlids they possibly can. Why they want to do that?
A dog whining. Okay. Sorry.
That's all right. There we go. Okay. Okay. So, I want to say again, I'm very very impressed with the phylogeny challenge. Is I think of all the arguments that like we have, I think the phylogeny challenge is the most destructive argument that we have.
Well, thank you. Let's talk about that because that's part where the Phylogeny Explorer project is coming from. Okay. The phylogeny challenge holds that if the idea of evolution from a common ancestor is fundamentally mistaken, like that they say, if all animals or all eukaryotes did not descend from a common ancestor, or if there's any truth at all to the idea of different species being created by God, then you would expect that there would be, as in people talk about baraminology and created kinds, and you can only have changes within a kind. That being the case, that means that there would be certain levels in a cladogram that even creationists would accept as legitimate. So they would trace a phylogenetic tree down to a certain point, down to one of these created kinds, also known as baramins, according to the words they made up to try to rationalize this away. But that when you get this handful of baramins, and I challenge people to come up with 3 or more, or 2 or more, that scientists would consider closely related, but that the creationists can show are actually different created kinds. They can't. There's no such thing as a kind. And you can't get creationists to admit that because of the slippery slope, that they give that up and they're done. That's it. And they can't identify what a created kind is because they don't exist. And they know that. They know that it's all made up, that God would have had to have created a handful of different species, designing them to look exactly as though they had evolved from common ancestors with each other. So one that they frequently mention is cats and dogs. Mm-hmm. Well, when they do that, when they come up with the cat kind and the dog kind, they have ignored that there's Phyloidea and Canoidea, and that within Canoidea is bears and seals and weasels and foxes, which are like cat-like dogs. And then when you look at the Phyloidea, the cat side, well, you've also got hyenas, which are derived from civets. And then, bear cats and meerkats and all of these other quasi things that most Americans are not aware of, because these all are from Asia.
But bentings and lensings and all those.
Cat division just throws it out the window. And then you've got the civets, which are like dog-like cats, right? Yeah. And foxes are like cat-like dogs. So you're already seeing a common ancestry thing there. And then when you look at the fossil record, you see things like Miacids and so forth. Where the hell is their division? So they can't come up with a kind. Even for dogs and cats, they can't come up with that division because it just doesn't exist. And they know it. And so the Bible doesn't help them out either, because the Bible says there's all kinds or all sorts of birds, whatever the fuck a sort is, and that these are all different kinds of birds. So the birds are not a kind. There's not a bird kind. There's all kinds of birds, which what that does is that negates the very meaning of the word kind. How can you have kinds of kinds?
They seem to be running into a nested hierarchy problem there.
Yes, exactly. So there is no division there, where there's no definition for a kind. They simply don't exist. There is no such thing as a baramin. All of these are made up terms, and the creationists will not answer these, even if they could understand them, which most can't, because that will be the thing that destroys it. It's the argument, that the be-all, end-all argument. Because it's not simply an argument of logic. It is also one of evidence, which requires a burden of proof. And there's nothing creationists hate more than a burden of proof.
Yeah, I've got actually 2 papers I read thanks to RJ about baraminology that'll probably throw you through a loop, unless you've already heard of them. So you've heard of Todd Wood? He works for Answers, and he's on the Answers in Genesis payroll. He wrote a paper, which is still on Answers in Genesis, that says Australopithecus sediba is in the human holobaramon. We are the same kind with Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Australopithecus sediba. We're all in this one kind together.
I wonder how they justify that.
It's hilarious because you read it and it says the problem is some of these apes have human characteristics and some of these humans have these ape-like characteristics.
Yeah. Now, they will usually accept Homo erectus as fully human, even when you're talking about a sample that only has like a 500 cc brain. But the thing is that you look at the overt ape characteristics in Homo erectus, these are undeniable. And then to include any of the Australopithecines, well, how do you make the division between the other Australopiths?
Yeah, it's really great. The other paper is by Kavanaugh and is it Snelling? No, that's not it. Anyways, David Kavanaugh is one of the guys who wrote it. They accept the entirety of the equids as one baramon. All the equids from Hyracotherium on up to Equus, just one baramon.
Okay, so how far out are Calicotheres?
Calicotheres, it's like the perissodactyl tree splits and you go up the taper rhino side, and Calicotheres
so they're including
by the tapers,
but not the rest of the perissodactyls.
So far, yes. Okay. They're getting there though.
And I was so frustrated when I got onto Noah's Ark and I see that they had a rhinoceros on there, just so that they could include, or just so that they could declare that it is a unicorn.
Diceras unicorn.
The one thing on Noah's Ark that they actually got correct. Except amusingly, their rhinoceros didn't have a horn. But even if you look at that, okay, well, where does that put Indricotheres then?
Yeah.
Just imagine what an Indricothere is for people who don't know. Imagine a rhinoceros with no horn, and it has a rhinoceros that is the shape of a horse and stands 18 feet tall. And it's as tall as a giraffe, but it's a horse-like rhino. And I can stand underneath the belly, and because I did this in the Los Angeles Museum of Natural History. They have a reconstruction of this. I can't remember what the other name is, Paraceratherium. And
yeah, they had like Beluchitherium. They had like 3 different names through time.
Beluchitherium is a different one.
Was it?
I'm trying to remember what that one is. I was thinking that it's the one that has the 2 shovel horns, but those are not actually rhinos. It's a different lineage.
Yeah.
They're just super.
Oh, you're talking about Titanotheres? Or Brontotheres? You're talking about Brontotheres?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah, but Paraceratherium was.
Beluchitherium is.
Mm-hmm. But
I'm having a senior moment.
That's okay. You know a lot more than me on this topic, so that's all right.
One of the people that's working on my project is younger than you. He's like barely in high school.
Oh.
And he knows, I swear, he knows more than I do. He's like the super nerd on paleo stuff. It's amazing how much this guy has absorbed in 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's one of our volunteers, and he actually has connections at 15 years old. He has direct connections to a whole bunch of professional paleontologists who regularly rap with this kid.
Wow.
Because he knows where he's going to be in 10 years.
Well, that's great. I love meeting other people who are interested in evolutionary biology and zoology. It's always no, I haven't seen that. So it's always great. So one last thing before you go, I said about hour would be fine. So I want to ask you about a topic that I'm very intrigued by but have very little knowledge of. and that'd be the mythicism area. Can you give us a brief overview on mythicism?
Okay. Mythicism is the idea. There's multiple variants of it. Is that the things that the Bible describes as history are not actually history; that they're mythologized, or that there may be a kernel of truth to it that is grossly exaggerated or is amalgamated so that it's made of the pieces of legends of different people's stories. A good example would be Moses. There's Moses has his childhood story where he's laid into the river and the reeds held together with pitch, and he's like drawn out of the water by somebody else down the road because there's this king who wants to kill all the toddlers, and so they're trying to protect him from the evil king. That exact story, if you remember, with Jesus has a similar thing where he has to run from Herod because the king wants it. So that Jesus story was taken from Moses, and Moses took his story almost verbatim from the story of Sargon, because Sargon has virtually the same word for word account of how he was laid in the river and floated downstream and drawn out. And then if you look at Exodus 20, 21, 22, and 23, this is where they're talking about the 10 commandments, which is actually dozens of commandments, and nobody realizes that because who reads the damn Bible? But several of these it's not 10 commandments, it's like 30 some odd. I can't remember how many there are, but some of them were lifted directly from the Stela of Law by Hammurabi. Now, Moses was supposed to have been somewhere between 1250 BC and 500 BC, but Hammurabi is from 1750 BCE. So he's much older. He's older than Moses regardless. And the laws that were supposedly given by the volcano god to Moses were already given by the sun god Shamash to Hammurabi centuries earlier. So we know that is an adaptation of earlier folklore. Right? There's no question about that. But then when we look at Jesus, we notice that Jesus has borrowed stories from Moses too, and that Jesus also has the loaves and the fishes story, where the exact same thing happens twice, where he has to pull out the loaves and fishes miracle, and his followers are equally amazed both times, like they hadn't seen him do that before. Right? Whoa, I didn't know you could do that. Like you did last Thursday. What? I don't get that. But there's
short-term memory loss, I guess.
I give a speech at the Gateway to Reason, and you can find it on my channel. It's called Mythical Man, wherein I talked about my particular mythicism, how Jesus is a composite character. He's based on all of these other different characters, some of which are completely mythological, and some of them are historic characters that if you brought them forward in a time machine, none of them would recognize themselves as Jesus, even though there are multiple people contributing to the lives of Jesus. For example, Josephus is now, there's some suspicion among some biblical scholars that the passion narrative in Mark isn't actually about the Jesus that it's supposed to be, that it's actually Jesus ben Ananias that was written about by Josephus, and that other people had mistranslated that or just associated them. And the same thing happened with Jesus of Damnius. I've actually argued with Christians who say when Josephus mentions Jesus of Damnius, they think that's their Jesus, because this was James, brother of Jesus, who is the anointed one, right? And so that's Jesus of Damnius, and they're saying that that's their Jesus of Nazareth, even though they lived decades apart. Jesus of Damnius cannot be the same guy, but the Christians say that he is. But it's the same with Jesus ben Ananias. He also lived decades after, and that's not the only one, because Josephus wrote about 19 different GZI, and one of them, Jesus people. There's a 20th one that he didn't actually mention the name of. He didn't call it Jesus, but he describes happening across these three people who were up on crosses, and he says that he knew them. So he was upset that these people are dying on the crosses. So he went to Titus to have them taken down. Right. Well, then in Luke, and Luke lived at the same time as Josephus. So in the Luke Passion narrative, you have this guy named, and by the way, Josephus' Hebrew name was Josephus Bar Matthias, which
Okay.
sounds an awful lot like Joseph of Arimathea. But when you read Luke, Luke is describing Joseph of Arimathea, who shows up with Jesus and the two other people are being crucified and asks to take the body down and put it in a tomb.
Mhm.
Well, from Josephus' perspective, he shows up and two of those guys survived, or two of those guys died and one lived. So it's like you're reading the same story written by guys who lived at the same time, because Luke didn't live in the time of Jesus of Nazareth. Luke lived in the time of Josephus Bar Matthias.
Mm-hmm.
So we see that these are stories being integrated together, and nobody has any way of dividing them. Or, as I said, the Christians are claiming Jesus of Damnius as their Jesus, when we know that can't be. So all of these people are being kind of stapled together into one composite story.
Well, that is really interesting. I think it's.
And then other mythicists have a little bit more bizarre things. Where they will say, very often with evidence, but not always compelling evidence, that Jesus was a construct of the Roman Empire, or that Jesus was a purely mythical character that was then historicized. And my best reference for that, because I think that is the case, you have Justin Martyr, who lived in the 2nd century, and so he lives right after. Oh, he actually lived at the same time too, as he was born when Josephus and Luke were about. But Justin Martyr describes Jesus not as an actual person who had only lived a couple generations before and might have met his grandfather. Justin Martyr describes Jesus as if he's an ancient character older than all the other Greek gods. That Jesus is the Son, and the Son is Jesus. And that Jesus pre-existed Dionysus and the legends of Jesus, that he says the legends of Jesus are older than the legends of Hercules or Jupiter. So how could this guy, a Christian apologist in the 2nd century, how could he believe that Jesus is thousands of years old? If his grandfather might have met him, if Josephus was writing about him, I mean, that obviously doesn't work. So I suspect that there's very little historicity to the Jesus character.
Yeah. Well, it's been about an hour. I did want to say though, if do you want to end the conversation, or do you want to go on a little bit longer?
I do need to go deal with some other things. I mean, if you had something pressing, I don't mind. I've got a little bit of time.
I did want to say, I think it's funny that the story of Moses was ripped off from Sargon, because Sargon was conquering Mesopotamia at the time the global flood was supposed to be happening.
Yep.
There's this whole area of ancient history. It's like just the transition period in politics of Mesopotamia from like the old dynasty to Sargon conquering everything. This whole transition period was happening while everyone was, drowned in the flood.
And nobody even noticed. We're building our pyramids in the midst of a flood nobody's paying attention to.
Yeah, the 6th dynasty's pyramids were built like 27 years, I think, like after the global flood happened. So it's like they died. All right, let's run to Egypt.
If you go with answers in Genesis, things actually get worse, because they choose a later date than one that is supported by archaeologists. I mean, I contend, as I think most others do too, that the flood is based on an actual flood of the cities of Shuruppak and Kish in Iraq around 2900 BCE. That it was just a small localized flood, but because Ziusudra was involved and they wrote a big story about him, that story was adapted later on in the story of Utnapishtim and Atrahasis and eventually Gilgamesh.
Yeah, BioLogos actually agrees with you on that. I looked that up. BioLogos, Francis Collins, like evolution theology website. Yeah, they actually agree with you on that. So there you go. I thought also I really enjoyed the I don't want to keep you too long, but I really enjoyed the Global Flood series.
Oh, thank you very much.
It was very nice. I have been using the paper by Soroka and Nelson so often. It is a slam dunk paper.
Which
that
paper
one
is that?
The Soroka and Nelson, the physical constraints on a Noachian deluge.
Oh, on it, yeah, the one with the two physicists from, I think it was University of Illinois.
Oh, that paper is perfect. That's such a wonderful paper. I was also the one you did on anthropology was very interesting because anthropology is very interesting to me. Of course, all evolutionary biology is interesting to me, but I really like anthropology. And I thought I'd never heard of Greco-Pithecus until then, but evidently a lot of creationists had been using that as an argument against the.
I'm gonna have to go.
Okay, that's all right. Well, thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. All right.